Quick and easy shouldn't equate to shoddy quality, which is why with just a little effort you can take your talking head videos from this to this. It's not actually as hard as you might imagine. You need to get 4 things right: camera settings, lighting, sound, and of course you. So let's start with the camera. In the opening video, everything we set was on auto. But to improve quality, you need to take control. And the first decision is whether to shoot in 4K or 1080p. If you can, use 4K, because even though the finished video will probably be output in 1080 because everyone watches this kind of content on their phone or computer, 4K gives you the option to zoom in a little while editing without losing quality, which means if you're using 2 cameras, you now effectively have 4 angles. Next, choose a suitable focal length. GoPro videos look great because their super wide lenses capture so much of the up-close action as well as the landscape. But that doesn't work so well here. A wide angle means you have to get really close to the camera. In the first video, I could reach out and touch it, which can cause the subject's face to appear long and narrow. So if you're using a zoom, opt for a longer focal length for rounder and fuller faces and to avoid the edges of the shot being distorted like a fishbowl. And if you're using 2 cameras like we are here, one on a tripod, the other on a motorized slider, set one wider than the other. We have a 35mm on the slider and a 16-55 zoom on the other camera, which is set to about 18mm. So not so wide that it distorts the image. Okay, so the next decision is frame rate. This kind of video doesn't require slow motion, so record in 24 frames per second, which looks more like film, or 30 frames per second, which gives a sharper TV look. If you need stylistic B-roll, 4K at 60 frames per second gives great slow-mo, while some cameras, like this Fuji X-T3, can do 1080p at 120 frames per second for seriously cool, super slow-mo. The frame rate you opt for dictates your shutter speed, which should be double your frame rate. Otherwise, footage can appear jittery and lack motion blur that our eyes naturally expect. So at 24 frames per second, you record at 1/48th of a second. At 30 frames per second, the shutter speed is set to 1/60th and 1/20th for 60 frames per second and so on. By keeping to these rules, the only variables you now really have are aperture and ISO, which determine the amount of light reaching the sensor. Aperture, which is measured in f-stops, determines whether the background is blurry or in focus. The lower the f-stop, the more light gets into the camera and the more blurred the background is. Videographers love low f-stops. The aperture on the 35mm lens goes to 1.4, meaning it lets in lots of light and can produce a very shallow depth of field, which is great for this kind of video because it keeps the viewer's attention on the subject. To keep the exposure adequate for your frame rate, shutter speed and aperture, you adjust the ISO. Simply put, the higher the ISO, the brighter or more exposed the image will be. To keep your images sharp and crisp, you want the ISO to be the lowest value it can be while making sure the image isn't underexposed. And that's where lighting comes in. The typical video setup has 3 lights: the key, the fill, and the rim or the hair light. In the bad video, all we used were the room lights and a small LED on top of the camera that threw out a harsh light. Not good. So first things first, turn out the house lights. The key is the primary light and is typically big, round and diffused so that the light wraps around the subject's face and casts shadows with soft, blurred edges. Because it comes from slightly above the subject and a little to the side, it will cast shadows on the other side of the face and perhaps underneath the chin, which can be lifted with a fill. Also soft and diffused, the fill is usually less bright than the key and sometimes might not even be needed, as the key can be reflected to fill in any shadows. And finally, there's the rim, or the hairline. Typically, this is boomed overhead, and its purpose is to outline the subject, which helps to separate them from the background and create some depth to the image. Unlike the key and fill, there's no need to diffuse it. Another difference is that while the key and fill are typically around 5,600 Kelvin to mimic daylight, the hair can be as low as 3,200, closer to an incandescent light bulb. One more thing, there are distinct advantages to using LEDs. For one, they consume much less power, so you can use more of them on a single circuit without tripping a breaker. They're also smaller and lighter than other bulb types, which is great for working on location. And they also burn cool, which is welcome in summer if you need to shut off a noisy AC unit while you record. Additional lighting is all about ambience and being creative, like we've done in the background here, with an orange and teal look, which is a classic in cinematography. Okay, so you're almost there. The last settings you need to check before you're ready to shoot are white balance and focus. It sounds technical and intimidating, but setting white balance is remarkably simple. You just need one of these. This is called a grey card, which you set in front of the camera. Pick Set Custom White Balance, which every camera has, take a photo, and you're done. Now, your whites will be white, your blacks will be black, and your colours will be true. And last, but crucially important, focus. In this kind of situation, manual focus is best. So long as you don't have a super wide aperture, creating a super shallow depth of field, the interviewee shouldn't move backwards and forwards so much that they fall in and out of focus. The trouble with autofocus is it can keep adjusting over and over so that your subject goes in and out of focus often. So just set the manual focus and leave it. Okay, so your camera and lighting are done. Next up, sound. Because our eyes tolerate bad video much better than our ears put up with poor sound, good audio is critical. And the worst audio you can get is by using the in-camera microphone, like we did in the opening bad video. Plugging a decent lavalier like this one from Deity into your camera will be an immediate improvement because it gets the microphone closer to the subject, my mouth. But you're still relying on the camera preamps, which are notoriously bad. So if you add an external preamp, you'll have markedly better sound. But I usually plug this lavalier into a small external recorder to use as a backup, in case something goes wrong with the primary audio, for which I have two shotgun microphones boomed above the subject. Why two? One responds more to bassier voices, the other is geared more to pick up mid-range sounds. So you can pick whichever recording suits your subject better. And with one plugged into an external recorder and the other into a separate preamp and then the camera, your bases are covered. Which brings us to the last topic, you. Because video is a visual medium, think about your appearance and don't just shuffle in looking like you spent the morning sitting on a park bench yelling at pigeons. The observant among you will have noticed since the opening video that I shaved and got a haircut. The eagle-eyed that I changed to rimless glasses. I also removed the surface shine from my face with an oil-absorbing wipe and a dab of transparent powder. And finally, I picked clothes to complement the teal and orange setup. In essence, video likes 3 looks. This one, a blend of rich tones like cream and caramel that evokes warmth and comfort. Then there are bright, bold, solid primary colours, which are often seen in television because of the upbeat sunny vibe they create. And finally, there is blending monotones, greys, blacks and whites, which look cool, stylish, sophisticated and modern. What doesn't work? Earthy, muddy, flat tones like beige and green that have low contrast. And there you have it. Follow these pointers to go from barely watchable to super professional. There's more to it, obviously, such as editing, motion graphics, stabilization methods, music, sound design, B-roll techniques, titles, and we'll cover those and the finer points raised here in further videos. And of course, don't hesitate to reach out with questions. But one last rule before we go, and it's of the hard and fast variety. Never say, "So without further ado," or "Let's jump right in." You hear it all the time, and it's just so